The Creative T60 are seriously impressive, and these desktop speakers can be found for £70 in the UK and $80 in the US. Links down in the description below will take you to your relevant stores, and also down there you'll find some alternative suggestions reviewed from yours truly. So to kick things off, let's talk about the build quality and design, and here subjectively I really do like the fact it's got an exposed 2.75 inch full range driver. However, you should consider that you don't want to be poking it around. Now elsewhere you do have a glossy frontal finish of the speakers, which is really nice on pictures, but when it comes to a practicality point of view, as soon as you start touching it, or indeed if you have carpeted floor like I do, it's going to attract a lot of dust and it's not really pleasant. I would have much preferred if Creative stuck to the matte finish that you find at the top and the side of the speakers. We should talk about the inputs and outputs, which are found again at the back of the right hand driver. Now at the top you do have a headphone output, but then you also have a microphone input, which is quite rare. Then you've got a USB Type-C input, which is a nice addition over the micro USB input which most speakers use nowadays. So here in the box you get a Type-C to Type-C input, and if you don't have a Type-C device on the other end, so for example if you don't have a modern laptop or motherboard, then you do also get a Type-C to Type-A adapter in the box, so you don't have to worry in that domain. Then you've got an auxiliary input if you don't want to use a digital input such as your PC or let's say games console. You can use a traditional auxiliary input as well. Now further down on the right hand channel you do have the connection to the left hand driver, and the left hand driver does have a integrated cable which feeds into it. The cable is plenty long, however the same couldn't be said about its power input. So you do need power for this, so in other words to connect it up to a wall socket. However, the wall plug cable itself is relatively short, so therefore it's quite ideal for laptop setups, but for PC setups it can be a little bit of a stretch. So with that out of the way, let's get on to the sound quality section. Now before getting into a little demo and also my subjective opinion about the desktop speakers, I should also mention that the speakers have got a Bluetooth connection. So it's got Bluetooth 5.0, which means you can go around 10 meters through walls, not like a ghost, but you can use them at a distance, so there's no issues there. However, they are limited to the SBC codec only, and connected up to my Android device I can affirm that this is the case. So you've not got AAC or let's say LDAC or any other codec, for example aptX is probably the most common one for Android users. In terms of frequency response, it's 50 Hz to 20 kHz, so it does cut off in the low end tones, which is no surprise because it doesn't have a built-in subwoofer. And finally, in terms of overall power output, they've got 30 watts RMS and 60 watts total peak power, according to Creative that is. Now with that all out of the way, let's get onto a sound demo. Now what I'm going to do is show you some annotations, so make sure you do pay attention for them. You might be able to see it on your screen anyway based on the mode that it's running on. We're going to play a music demo first, and I'm going to cycle through the different modes. And after going through a music demo, I'm going to go into a more of a piece to camera, and this is going to be me reviewing the Skoda Enyaq iV on Totally EV, and check it up on your pop-up banner in case you're interested in watching that review of that vehicle itself.
You always should hide, then learn how to fly. It's the only way you know how to play this game. Success, I'm not quite sussed it yet. When I reach the brink, don't stop to think. I always sing, and now next thing you know, I'm crawling, I am crawling. My way back to falling from so high, falling from so high, so high.
Objectively, I prefer it over the VW ID4. However, I just wish that Skoda had retained the Vision IV's singular headlight design, which stretched around the front grille of the vehicle. Instead, on the Enyaq iV, the production model, you've got a bit more of a traditional look, two headlights and a rather oversized covered grille. Now nevertheless, the car has got quite a muscular and sporty look. Some might associate it with certain Audi vehicles out there. I mean, they do come from the Volkswagen group anyway. anyway. Now, while a sound demo over YouTube isn't exactly ideal, let's get onto my subjective opinion and share you some experiences from someone who's reviewed over 400 audio related devices. Now, in terms of the sub-bass frequency range, it is a little bit cut off. There's no surprise here because it doesn't have a dedicated subwoofer, and even from the specs that you can find on Creative's website, it does tail off at the 50 Hz frequency range. Now, nevertheless, the full range drivers do try and portray a decent low-end extension, but that's really where you're going to be hearing the mid-bass frequency response because, well, the mid-bass is pretty punchy and lively. It is a tad uncontrolled at times, but for a speaker system of its price and of its class, I must say I was pleasantly surprised with what Creative achieved over here. The only flip side over here is the fact that no matter which mode you run it on, the mids are pretty recessed. Now, you can counter this by enabling the kind of clear dialogue mode, and therefore you can hear the dialogue come out just a little bit more, and hopefully that was pretty apparent when I was enabling it or disabling it through these sound demos. But if it wasn't apparent enough, then what I will say is that it does really what it says on the tin. It boosts that mid-range frequency at the expense of the other frequencies, in other words the highs and the lows. So if you really are listening to, let's say, podcasts, or let's say, YouTube videos which are mainly voice orientated, or let's say news or anything like that, then that text or the voice function will really enable you to get the most out of the video or the content that you are watching or indeed listening to. Now, if you were to disable that, you do get a little bit more of an all-round sort of frequency response from the speakers, but as a result you do get that pushed back, recessed and slightly veiled mid-range response. Now, moving on to the highs, here the highs are pretty good for a set of speakers that do not have dedicated tweeters, but alas, there is no really crystal clear highs at the top end, and therefore that kind of sparkly tones that you will get from bookshelf speakers that do have that dedicated tweeter. But again, putting things into perspective, for a speaker of its price, it's perfectly acceptable, and the highs will still keep you excited when you're listening to your favorite tracks. Now, moving on to this Soundstage, I was again pleasantly surprised. Now, this is mainly because it has that stereo kind of surround option that you can enable via the right-hand channel, which I highlighted before. And if you were to enable this option, suddenly the speakers come to life, and I actually found myself listening to the speakers with this mode enabled, because without it enabled, the sound feels a little bit claustrophobic and doesn't really sound that wide and deep that you would kind of expect. And despite the fact it being 2.0 speakers, with that stereo mode enabled, you'll be actually pretty surprised at the ability of the speakers at how they can portray a nice width and depth in terms of the Soundstage department. Now, as for tonality and imaging, it's pretty much perfect. There's no real issues over here. Of course, bearing in mind that is a relatively inexpensive set of speakers, there's only so much that you can expect here in comparison to, well, much more expensive solutions out there on the market. And so now we get onto recording quality, and everything you can hear right now is my Mod Mic 4.0 connected directly into the Creative T60, as you'll be able to see over here. If I just go on to properties, you'll be able to see the different settings, and it's recording at 16-bit 48 kilohertz. So now with that out of the way, I just want to talk about a few other settings, specifically with this Smart Comms Kit. Now, this is the Creative app which you can download. It's free to download, and in here you can see there's a few different settings. Now, the voice detect function works automatically, so therefore you don't have to mute your mic when you're enabling it or not. I'm not going to enable it just for the purpose of this video, but it does as the name suggests. Is it something I would use? Not personally, because I would much prefer using a physical on and off mute function on my mic itself. Now, as for the noise clean out, if I enable it, you'll be able to hear a drastic difference in terms of my voice. I'm not sure if the auto adjust is really picking it up, but if I disable it, you've got the low noise clean out, and as I ramp it up, you can hear that my voice really does drastically change. Now, in my case, as I've got a decent microphone, I have that completely disabled. Now, as for noise clean in, I can't quite demonstrate this unless I had the microphones picking up the audio output of the speakers, but this is if someone has a very noisy background and allows you to kind of hone into their voice a little bit more via the noise clean in function. Now, you can have the Smart Comms Kit enabled via the advanced advanced tab, but if you don't press the advanced tabs, you'll have an on and off toggle on its own. I would suggest using advanced so then you can play around with the settings. So now while we're in the app, let's talk a little bit about the app. And first off, in the first menu segment over here, you've got the acoustic engine. Now I don't really like using any of these features, but you might like to use it. For example, the crystallizer function does over accentuate the highs a little bit at the top end. The bass function seems to just kind of muddle up in terms of the bass and gets a bit confused with the bass frequencies. And as for the smart volume, as the name might suggest, might be useful if you're going to be using it in a nighttime scenario. Now for the equalizer, I actually had the audio demo running in its flat mode, so you can click over here, you've got a bunch of different ones to choose from, but actually in terms of audio quality, it is completely subjective, and of course depends in terms of the music you listen to. I listen to a lot of R&B music, and surprisingly the preset EQ for the R&B menu is actually pretty good. So you can play around with this. You can see you've got full adjustments for you to play around, so you can see you can adjust every frequency band depending on the way you like, and you've got multi-band adjustment, and then you've got a preamp, bass and treble function, which does, as the name might suggest, as you can see, adjust the entire treble, or let's say the bass frequency. So it's really nice to see this actually capable of doing this. And of course, if you don't want this, you can of course disable the equalizer as well for your needs. Now as for the mixer function, it is pretty self-explanatory. It allows you to see the microphone's input, or it's on or off, and then you've got the speaker playback volume. You press this little button, you can adjust the left and right independently, kind of an extension to what you'd find on your Windows settings. Now moving off the mixer, here you've got the sound modes which you can filter through, and this is very much on like the EQ presets that are over here. It's kind of a quick access to it. And if you go to playback, here again shows you what the speakers are running at. It's 16-bit 48 kilohertz, so there's the audio playback via the speakers themselves. And as for the recording, again it's 16-bit 48 kilohertz as I showed before, and here you can see it's set as default, and it's the default communication device as well. Finally, in terms of the settings, you can also update the driver and the application directly from this tab, and quite frankly just the entire process over here is really spectacular for a piece of equipment at this price point and the level of customization that you also get. And so with all of that, what do I make of the Creative T60 desktop speakers? Well, frankly, I am left pretty much jaw-dropped. At around £60 or $80, I've been left smiling throughout this review because I'm really impressed with what Creative have managed over here. Not only do the speakers have a decent build quality, they've got a great set of inputs and outputs. It's got a really comprehensive app which really does support the speakers function. It also does sound really nice, and you can tailor the EQ to your liking, and even via the physical buttons found on the right hand channel, it'll allow you to quickly toggle on certain modes which might give your content or the music that you're listening to through these speakers that extra bit of life and pizzazz. So as a result of all of this, I can't really see myself not recommending these speakers. They are a phenomenal buy, specifically at their price point. I think they're a fantastic set of desktop speakers which really can't be beaten, at least in my humble opinion. And as a result, they get my Best Buy award. Now I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, and of course if you like this video, drop a like, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and even follow me on Totally EV to see the latest car reviews. Alright, I've been Totally Dubbed, take care of yourselves, and goodbye.